Well, the Republican primary delegate count is just getting started. Nikki Haley's path forward, well, there's some questions around it. Former President Trump currently leads Haley in the delegate count 32-17. Okay, not many have been decided. You need 1,215 delegates to secure the GOP nomination. Early next month, well, that's the Nevada caucus. Haley won't compete, which awards all 26 delegates then to former President Trump. Then South Carolina's primary. That's on February 24th. Trump has a significant polling lead, 50 delegates at stake there, and there's a possibility Trump could get all of those. And then after that, some of the biggest delegate hauls come on Super Tuesday. There is some winner-take-all states and some hybrid states where Trump could really run the table. To talk about all this, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Doug Heye join us now. Caitlin is a CBS News political correspondent. Doug previously served as communications director for the RNC and to former House Majority Leader Eric Cantor. Doug, as the resident RNC delegate expert and rules expert here at the table, I mean, you're both experts, but Doug is the sort of assigned expert at the table. How difficult is Nikki Haley's path, or is there even a path for her, rationally, mathematically, to win the nomination?
There's a path, but it's really tough to find and look for, and ultimately isn't really up to her. It's about Donald Trump faltering, Donald Trump having some legal issue or health issue that then sways things. Now, she's going to stay in this at least through South Carolina, but as you mentioned, she may not get any delegates from her home state. That's not a great place to be in. Ron DeSantis would have been in that same place if he were running. He would have gotten no delegates from Florida, most likely. So she's trying to make her best case of why she should stay alive and stay in this. And ultimately, that case is about the problems around Donald Trump. So when we see court rulings against him, that helps buttress her case. But again, the political case and the mathematical case are not necessarily the same thing. So they're both hard, though. So, Caitlin, it sounds like one of the things that Nikki Haley may be saying as she makes her fundraising tour of Florida, Texas, California, and New York is, hey, let's, I understand the delegate math is tough, but we need a, in case of emergency, break glass plan. And I should be the one behind that broken glass.
Their campaign is making a couple different arguments here. First, they are saying that, look, 2 states have voted. There are still a lot of states to go. That's true. They are looking at states that have open primaries. So South Carolina is an example. Some big Super Tuesday states are examples where party registration doesn't matter. However, this is a game of getting enough delegates. And when you look at these maps that you have up here, that is such an uphill climb. The big case that she's been trying to make, to Doug's point, is about electability. She says this over and over again. Look, I'm the most electable. Look at all the polls. If you elect me, we have a mandate for winning up and down the ballot. The issue is, however, and you can speak to this too, Republicans I talk to, electability is just not a big priority because most Republicans think that Biden is easily beatable, especially among those supporting Trump. So yes, she's trying to argue that there's still a lot of game left to be played, but the rules of the game right now do not benefit her. And that's another real story of this election, is the way in which Trump...
And Doug, another thing that Nikki Haley tries to hang her hat on is, well, Michigan, February 27th. Yeah, it's a primary. You might do well there, but there's a convention on March 2nd where most of the delegates get actually awarded, and you don't have an inside track there.
Yeah.
So these things are complicated.
They're complicated. That's also a long time away. I mean, the gulf between New Hampshire and South Carolina, obviously Nevada with its caucus is in between. That's a long political life. And we see that quite often political lives end very quickly in campaigns. But also, I think the electability argument, while it's one of the better ones that Haley can make, it's not just the issue that people believe that Donald Trump can be or can beat Joe Biden, because anybody can beat Joe Biden, Republicans think. They've been told electability counts before. They were told John McCain's the only one who can beat Barack Obama. He didn't. Then they were told 4 years later, Mitt Romney's the only one who can beat Barack Obama, and he didn't. So they don't buy the electability argument. Anyways, it's why Nikki Haley is talking about emergencies and chaos and what ifs.
And Doug, as you well know, those who are most likely to show up in the largest numbers are base Republican voters, and base Republican voters this day and era are Trump voters.
No question about it. And I think that's where South Carolina becomes really interesting. I think most people concede that Donald Trump's going to win that. The Haley campaign isn't necessarily conceding that. But what that margin is, it looks to be larger than it was in New Hampshire and certainly Iowa, or close to Iowa. And this is her home state, a state that she was governor of, elected statewide. That becomes very difficult to make the political case, much less the mathematical case, for staying in the race.
And Caitlin, on Super Tuesday, That's 36% of allocated delegates. That's a big, big map. And I mean, I've covered a few of these campaigns. If you're not already advertising in those states, if you're not already putting a marker in those states while you're trying to compete in South Carolina, it's going to be too late. And things will slip through your fingers.
Exactly. And the idea that, there's a short amount of time after South Carolina to the Super Tuesday states. So she's focusing the next several weeks on South Carolina, campaigning very heavily there. Quick turnaround to Super Tuesday. She argues that she has the money to stay in it. But I think, Trump's hold on the state parties and the way the campaign has been able to organize the parties in such a way that benefits him in the delegate count. That's apparent in Nevada especially. That is a big story of this election. And the way that he's able to get all of these delegates, the way that he's organized these state parties.
Doug, pick up on that, because I think this is an underappreciated part of the reality of this Republican nomination battle, such as it is. In 2016, the RNC and state parties were not Trump aligned. They are, if not decisively, certainly more visibly aligned than they were then.
No question about it. And we saw the RNC almost go all in for Trump, which would have turned the RNC as an organization into an anti-Haley mechanism, which the RNC has very strict rules about objectivity and neutrality as opposed to the senatorial and congressional committees. But I think for Haley here, the question is about math in two ways. One, can she get the delegates she needs? Obviously not. But can she continue to accrue delegates so that if we get to that break glass scenario, if Donald Trump is convicted, for instance, if there's a health issue, she can legitimately say, I'm the one with the most delegates. I outlasted everybody else. I should be the nominee moving forward.
Question for you both, and picking up on what you just said, Doug. Money, math, but also is there a way of saying, hey, Trump, I'm going to stay in to show you that I have this constituency in the suburbs, in the exurbs, among women that you will need. And you better think about me when you're making that running mate choice.
That's a big part of subliminally what she's saying. Her challenge with that is Team Trump wants nothing to do with her. And internally, they're not just knifing her so that we can all see it. They're knifing her with Donald so that when he makes that decision, it most likely would not be her.
Caitlin,
and you hear that from his supporters as well. There is a real divide, and he has cast her as the kind of establishment, elite, donor-based globalist class, and that has seeped through in conversations that I've had with voters, not just those supporting him, but Republican voters at large. But her case is, to your point, have the money. I'm the last person standing, the last woman standing, and she's starting to increase those attacks against Trump. We'll see if that makes any difference.
And choosing Haley would be a completely rational political decision, so we should assume that Donald Trump probably goes elsewhere.
And who else would President Trump have sent to the UN as the United States ambassador but a globalist? Let's be honest. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Doug Heye, thank you so very much.